Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What's Their Why, the podcast. I'm Darren White, and I'm delighted to say that joining me today we have Rachel Arthur. Rachel is Head of Computing Program Design at Teach First, where she's also responsible for leading all of the computer programs across the UK. And I was very fortunate to hear Rachel speak recently at an LGFL conference. We've been chatting ever since, and I'm so delighted to have you on the show. Welcome, Rachel.
Oh, what an introduction. Thanks, Darren. It's lovely to be here.
It's Friday afternoon. It's miserable. It's horrible, but at least it's Friday afternoon, right?
Yeah, we'll bring hopefully some sunshine between us to this Friday afternoon for people. But yeah, it's very grim in Manchester. Grey skies as always. So yeah, anything to keep the motivation up this afternoon.
And as if by magic, a tenuous link to motivation straight off the back there. So obviously, that's one of the reasons why we're here today. So can you tell us a little bit about your own kind of background in education, Rachel, and what kind of motivates and engaged you as a student and then latterly in your professional career as well?
Oh gosh, so yeah, well, when I was at school, computing wasn't a thing. Well, it was a thing, but it wasn't called computing. We very much had IT in schools. I was lucky to go to a really good state non-selective school, but a really good one at that, Lim High School, if anyone knows it. We had great we just had great IT teachers. We had two female IT teachers who were brilliant and really motivated and inspired me, despite doing a horrendous GNVQ in ICT as my GCSE. There were pages and pages of screenshots of things, which was awful to put together. Many people will probably have taught that and remembered the days of screenshots of qualifications, but nevertheless inspired me to go on to do a degree in IT. And I'd say the other person that really motivated me in that world was my dad, because he was always quite interested in tech. He didn't work in tech. He's worked in the brewing industry for years. But he was always playing on spreadsheets at the weekend, doing bits of work. And I just thought these things were fascinating. Like, not many 11-year-old girls are fascinated by spreadsheets, but I certainly was. And I wanted to work out how conditional formatting works and all of those things. So that was like my initial motivations in this industry. And then went on and did my degree and decided to train to become a teacher with Teach First. So I trained with Teach First myself as a computing teacher, and really wanted to train with Teach First because of the links with educational disadvantage. And since then, that's been the area that I've worked in. Always worked in schools in disadvantaged contexts, and just really passionate about what computing can do for the pupils in those schools that can change outcomes for them in the future. We know tech industry can have brilliant opportunities, brilliant pay, brilliant avenues for people to go down. So just trying to open up the access to those careers for those pupils to do what we can to make a difference to those communities. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Took a little break from teaching to work at PwC in cybersecurity, realised that wasn't my why, and came back into schools because I missed the kids so much. But it was really good to get some industry experience and do something a little bit more techie for a while. But yeah, since then been in schools, and then eventually became assistant head teacher, and then moved into this role because it's such a great opportunity to write the teacher training program for Teach First. So yeah, exciting times.
Giving something back as well, which is lovely, isn't it?
Hopefully, yeah.
It's one of those things. It's quite difficult sometimes. I remember like looking back through my career, and obviously mine goes back a lot further than yours does, because we didn't even have IT as a lesson when I was at school to start off with. And I think eventually we got one computer. I think it was a BBC in the corner of the room, and two people were allowed to touch it, and that wasn't really so I've come from completely the opposite kind of end of the spectrum, in that most of my IT use has been self-taught because of the need to use it, because it's there, and that's developed my why, if you like, probably from university time, where I shared halls of residence with 7 other guys, and they were all on computing courses, and I was on a Spanish course, so I was like, yeah, you guys turn it on, you do what you need to do with it, and then I'll just use it, kind of thing. But that did get me interested at that stage, but it wasn't until much later, probably the mid 2000s, when I first got my first interactive whiteboard, which was groundbreaking at the time, because most people in the school still had the rolling green chalkboards and were covered in dust by the time they went home every day. So that was completely game changing, and I just developed then the attitude that I was just going to press buttons, and it wasn't my problem if it broke.
The fear of breaking it is so common, isn't it? I think with new technology, everyone's like, "Is this gonna break? Am I gonna break this?"
And I think it's also it's not just the fear of breaking it, is it? But it's the fear of breaking it in front of other people, and not knowing what to do with it. And I'm the same with presentations as I always was in lessons. If I was practicing and it went wrong, I didn't care. If it was with people I knew really well, I didn't care. But if it was in front of a group of students, as much as I'd make out, I didn't care, and I'd laugh it off, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is an adventure, guys. Let's see what happens next," kind of thing. It was always, it always hurt that little bit more when it went wrong in front of an audience, kind of thing. So it's really interesting as well. Like you say, you yourself trained through Teach First, and now you've gone full circle. Is that the reason for why you've ended up where you are?
I think because I've always stayed in touch with Teach First throughout my career. So when I trained to teach, obviously it was at Teach First. Then when I left teaching and wanted to come back into teaching, I got back in touch with Teach First and asked them if there was like a school that I could go to, or if there was anyone that they would recommend, or any school that they'd recommend that I went to. So they have helped throughout my career at various stages in the network that's associated with it. And then, when I saw this job come up, I was like, I can't miss the opportunity to give something back in such a subject specific way. I think it was a big move for them to employ heads of subject. And I think to be able to do a role which is purely focused on computing as initial teacher training is a really unusual opportunity. And for that to be specialising in disadvantaged schools, and what does it mean to be a computing teacher in a disadvantaged context, opens up like a whole door of research avenues that are so fascinating, and hopefully will make a difference. So it was important to me that I will always work in those schools and those contexts, because that's where you can make the most difference, I think. So it sounds very like evangelical, doesn't it? It's not. I just want to do something that matters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are many people who, for their own reasons, aren't prepared to work in that kind of environment. So we absolutely need people who are 100% seeking out those kind of environments and saying, yes, I definitely do want to commit to work in there.
And they come with their own unique set of challenges. I think all schools do. I'm not saying that working in that kind of school is more difficult or different. They're just a different set of challenges. But that's why I think it was, when this job came up and it was initial teacher training for computing, specialising in that environment, I was like, well, that's what I spent my whole career doing. So it seems like the right thing to specialise in that area. So very niche.
Yeah, but so important, because it's well documented, not just the teacher recruitment crisis, but the recruitment crisis for computing teachers, and also I suppose you'd say reasonably recent kind of drive to retrain IT and business teachers to become computing teachers, or PE teachers, or anybody who had any kind of capacity on the timetable, suddenly ending up teaching computing. And that's a real challenge for people, isn't it?
I think it was when I first started, they had just changed it was the year that they changed from IT to computing, and the national curriculum changed. And in the department that I was in, there were some DT teachers that had been IT teachers by accident, and then suddenly were being expected to teach computing. And with that came the spec changes for the GCSE, and having to teach programming for the first time, I think was a massive, massive leap for a lot of people. And we were lucky that the NCCE and others have done such great training and support for people transitioning over. But there's still so many schools that are in that situation. And it's surprising when I go and see trainees and go and visit different schools that even though there is that wealth of support out there, not a lot of schools still aren't accessing it and using the things that are available to support those teachers. And I mean, I can't even imagine what it must feel like to go from one day teaching something that you're really, really confident in to being told, like, actually, no, we're not doing that anymore. And you need to completely change what you're doing. So, yeah, it's interesting. And especially with now seeing some IT qualifications being accredited again this year, like, will schools swing back that way, or will they stick with computer science GCSEs? Will the computer science GCSEs be broader? Will we ever see a GCSE that covers the kind of 3 elements of the national curriculum at Key Stage 3? So yeah, there's so much in there, but it's such a breadth of knowledge for a teacher to be able to teach. And I know every teacher feels like, my subject's the biggest, and when I meet with the other heads of subjects, we always have debates about whose subject's got the most in it. But I think computing is such a broad area, and especially for teachers that are non-computer science specialists, to have to teach those areas is a real challenge.
100%, and even more so at the moment with the advent of ChatGPT and version 4 as opposed to version 3, where to a certain extent, I've not explored version 4 at all myself yet, but I kind of get the impression that we're not far from being able to say whatever we were asking in version 3, actually just do it in version 4. If you wanted to create an app, actually version 4 will do it for you.
Websites, apps.
Yeah, exactly. And therefore, that kind of need, it potentially is going to become more niche again, because it's going to be, the focus is going to be on that AI side of things. And I know there were some comments online yesterday about being towards the top of the kind of like the adoption curve, and we're naturally probably going to see a drop off at some point fairly soon as people get used to the for want of a better word, the hype around it and all of that kind of thing. But then it will come back up again and it will plateau, and we'll be looking at actually where can we make the real use of this kind of technology. So it's always really interesting to kind of look at it from the perspective of teaching and where things like AI can work. And obviously there's a huge amount of conversation out there about using AI to reduce workload and to automate those kind of repetitive options. But the creative side of it is just absolutely phenomenal. And the world really is your oyster, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess that brings you to, well, what does that mean then for the curriculum and what we're teaching? Because if there are tools out there that can create code for us, then do we need to be teaching pupils to code anymore? Is that, it's gone from being the most relevant, most important skill to maybe not anymore? But then we do need, in the budget this week, huge investment in AI and AI research, and we need people to be creating the software in the next iterations. ChatGPT 7, 8, 9, 10. Our pupils will be the ones, hopefully, that are going out to pioneer in that world. So yeah, maybe programming will become a more niche skill set, but still an important one. But alongside that, we need to be teaching all pupils how to work in a world that is AI enabled, because it's undoubtedly going to change a lot of career paths. I was on the train the other day, got speaking to some sports journalists about it, and they were panicking about their jobs because they were like, this can write a post-match analysis better than I can, faster than I can. So what's my role here? And it isn't, there's loads of quotes about how this is the first iteration of this software. Like, it isn't where it could be, but I think everyone's starting to see where it could be, and that's, it's a change in time, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And for those sports journalists, we've already seen a match of the day without presenters, so
let's not get into that one.
Personally, I didn't watch it, but
no, I didn't. I boycotted that.
Yeah, it's amazing that lots of people saying that the viewing figures went up, and I'm like, it's just voyeurism.
I didn't realise that.
What it's like, it's not that I want to watch the program. But so you mentioned about providing, the right kind of learning for all learners there, and that's one of the things I really wanted to kind of get into with yourself, because I know you're really keen on kind of like the landscape and what it looks like for neurodivergent learners and teachers as well. Come to that. So where did your interest in all of that come from?
Well, I am neurodivergent. So when I was at school, I was diagnosed with dyslexia in my, which was picked up in the very end of sixth form by an amazing head of sixth form. And I just suddenly took a massive dip in my grades. They just plummeted when I moved from GC to A level. Clarity in things, my assessments in English and my written assessments in English. Spelling tests were always the worst days of my life as a in primary and secondary, but it's never picked up. Much to the annoyance my mum is blame. Anyway, so she just never picked up on it. I think that's the thing. There's so many people that are high functioning and masking and able to get through school and through the system without these things being picked up, and it can cause lots of problems if you're not getting the support and help that you need. So yeah, I found that out when I was 18 and recently been diagnosed with ADHD about a year ago. So the combination of those things just makes me super passionate about what can we do to support pupils to get diagnosed and to get the support that they need. But also there are so many teachers, so many people in education who are neurodiverse, and we don't really talk about it. We spend a lot of time talking about how are we supporting pupils in the classroom, but there's never that lens put on, okay, so how do we support teachers that are neurodiverse? Because we need teachers to be representative of the pupils that they're teaching. So inevitably there'll be many neurodivergent teachers. So what can we do to support them in this, because schools are not always the easiest place if you're neurodiverse. So
absolutely,
lots that we can be doing there.
And so much of what goes on a day-to-day basis in schools quite often gets put down to kind of relationships. And if you build the relationships, everything else will come. And actually that can be a massive barrier and a real problem to a lot of people, because myself, I suffer from anxiety and things like that. You put me in a room with the people I don't know, and I will probably choose to sit on my phone or crack on with some work, or hope that someone else comes and talks to me rather than the other way around, sort of thing. So just turning around to people and saying, well, yeah, you crack the relationship side of it, and then everything else will come with it. It's easy to say, but like you say, we seem to feel like, and it's been the same with CPD and things like that for years in schools, that what we insist on doing for pupils, we don't even consider doing for the adults that we're working with. And it's just
there's so many CPD sessions that I've sat through, and I'm sure many others have, that don't meet the teaching standards, never mind any of the new learning around metacognition and the science behind learning. I've been in a CPD session about the science behind learning that doesn't meet any of the things that the science behind learning suggests that we should be doing. And it's just ironic, like as educators, we should be the best people at delivering training to other adults, but actually there's a big divide between pedagogy and andragogy, and those two things are separate. And I think it's very easy to assume that because you're a good teacher that you'd be good at delivering adult learning, and those two things are very different. And there's so many things with neurodiversity and adult learning, like even as it gets very meta, but thinking about how you are communicating to adults that are neurodiverse about pupils that are neurodiverse, and not using that deficit model of thinking and not talking in that way is how, as someone who is dyslexic and has ADHD, sitting in a training session where they're saying, oh, these pupils may not be able to attain as well, or these pupils may not be able, and I'm like, well, I'm here. So hopefully they will. We really need to change our thinking around neurodivergence being a negative, and it be actually really seeing the positives. And there's some amazing work being done with people like setting up the neurodiversity centers of excellence, where they're specifically recruiting people into tech who are neurodiverse, because they recognize that those strengths really relate well in tech roles. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting area, and kind of brings you back to the conversation about teacher recruitment and retention, because if we are losing teachers, is that part of the why? And could we be doing more to make teaching more flexible, more inclusive, more supportive for people with those needs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I was reading a post online this morning. Adrian Lyons, who's a former HMI, was talking about, you know, Ofsted over the years, and the fact that he, through his experience, has been very vocal in the fact that the few months that people go through for ITT training is nowhere near any kind of preparation for being a highly skilled teacher. You know, it doesn't even scratch the surface that first year. And actually, what we tend to do, and I was very lucky. I went through, I did my degree, and then I went on, I did a PGCE, and I was in the first school I did my placement in was fantastic. They were hugely supportive, really big school in South London, but a hugely supportive department. Got to do a lot of team teaching, got to do a lot of work with the rest of the department. I was given a lot of responsibility in terms of my teaching load, but I was also given lots of opportunity to work with other people at the same time. I went on to my second school, and it was pretty much kind of, you're a bit in the way, turn up, teach your lessons, and then get out the building. And that was, you know, a massive turn off, and didn't help at all. But then when I started work, you know, properly, I was very fortunate that my school employed me from the end of June in time for September. And
brilliant.
Yeah, I spent like that 6 weeks in the summer getting to know people, getting to know the school, the routines, getting to shadow students, shadow staff, do some team teaching and things like that. A little bit of cover here and there just to get to know things, but helped me feel like I hit the ground running in September. But then I had that mentorship alongside it and everything else. And then I look at other colleagues through the years who've gone through things like the graduate trainee program, graduate teacher program, and in some cases have, you know, just turned up and been given a timetable, and then people saying, right, be a teacher. And it frightens the living daylights out of me. It really does. Like, I don't know how they do it.
Well, I don't know about the graduate teacher program. I know with our trainees, they are employed by their school, so they are teachers from day one. But it's very similar to what you were saying with that run up over the summer. You know, our trainees have what we call Summer Institute, which is 6 weeks over the summer where they're running up. They go in and visit the school. They get the timetable, but we do that intensive training with them before they go in, so they're not kind of just dumped in on the first day expecting to teach. But I think that they, you know, that's the reason that we do the program over 2 years, because you can't cover the breadth of knowledge and depth of teaching that you can that anyone needs in 12 months. And I guess that's kind of why it's great that we've moved away from NQTs being a 1 year thing, and it's seen as an early career framework, and a lot of our trainees go on to do our ECF program, and that's subject specific. So you've got that kind of training running alongside, and, you know, really, really good to see so many opportunities for kind of masters in education in the MPQ program. So teachers are continuing to learn, and I think we just need to move away from this idea that anyone is going to be a great teacher after 1 year of training. Like, you can be really good and you can deliver some great outcomes for those pupils, but surely the best thing about teaching is that you never get to finish it. Like, you're always getting to learn more and develop. And I think, you know, I'm very honest that I've learned so much from other people. I'm certainly not top of my game, and don't think I ever will be, because then it would be finished. So we need to keep iterating and keep improving and keep learning from each other. So yeah, hopefully that's something that we embed into the teaching program, that, you know, things like subject development, it's just a drop in the ocean. You've got to prioritize what you're teaching first and carry on going. But I think computing's really good for that, because so many teachers are having to learn new specs and everything's changing all the time. I wrote an article about AI on Monday and had to update it on Wednesday. You know, it's that fast. So that's part of the joy and part of the challenge, I think.
That is, and that's where, you know, we've also got to recognize that, you know, certain subjects are going to need more, for want of a better word, more slack or more scope to be able to keep up, because subjects like computing are going to move and going to change significantly more in a short space of time than, say, something like maths, for example, where actually things are fairly stable. Yes, we have new approaches every now and again, but it's not literally changing overnight, and it's not changing the world. And coming back to your point, we've got to be constantly on our toes. And I think it was Steve Jobs who said, like, he doesn't want to be the smartest person in the room because it means you're in the wrong room. But absolutely right. We're all still learning from each other, and that's why I love these kind of conversations, because you take away different bits from it, and different people will take different things from it as well. Coming back to that neurodivergent point, one message can be kind of interpreted in so many different ways, and actually we haven't taken enough notice of that kind of thing as well. I've lost count a number of times where I've heard people say, well, I taught them it. Whether they learned it is another thing. And it's kind of like, it's we've got to do better on that front, 100%. And it always takes me back to kind of over the years. I did about I did 7 years, I think it was, as a head of year in the secondary school, and it was a fantastic time. Absolutely loved the job, loved working with the students, loved building up the relationship with the students and the families, and you got to really understand their motivations and their whys and what it was that drove them, if they would let you, obviously. Not everyone does, but that period of time was so reactive, because you were constantly dealing with things that had happened elsewhere that you couldn't really have control over. When I stopped working in the pastoral route, the sudden realization that potentially I had maybe a free period that I could use for my own personal development was just like mind-blowing. Because that would always be a case of I'd finish a lesson and I'd go, right, let's check my pigeonhole. What's happened that I need to pick up and deal with? And inevitably there was something, to suddenly going, right, I've finished teaching, I'm going to put the kettle on, I'm going to have a cup of tea, and I'm going to sit down, and actually I'm going to read a blog, or I'm going to dive into this in a bit more detail, or I'm going to reflect on a lesson previously. And all of that kind of thing, just after 7 years of being in the pastoral system, really was like alien to me again, because it's something I hadn't had since when I was a trainee, because all of that time just got taken up. It's very odd,
It's a luxury that it shouldn't be, but it feels a luxury to have the time to actually sit and read the research and the latest about what you're doing. And I think, Twitter and things like that are great, but they can become echo chambers of the same voices and the same people that have the time and have the luxury of being able to do the research and read it, especially in smaller subjects. And I think with new tech that's coming out like ChatGPT and other AI software, hopefully that will start to transform teachers' workloads. And if we can get this right, like, I have major concerns about it, as I spoke about in at the conference. There's some real barriers for schools that we have to work through. But if we can get it right, then it can be a game changer in terms of freeing up teachers' time to be able to engage in things like research. Like, even the idea that a piece of software can summarize an article for you. Like, you don't have time when you're teaching to read massive research studies. As fascinating as they are, like, anything over 2 or 3 pages just isn't going to get read during my working week.
Absolutely.
And maybe some teachers do have the time to do that, and really happy if they do. But I think for a lot of teachers, just having something that you can trust to summarize something effectively for you, trust with a massive asterisk next to it, for certain pieces of software. But if we can get to a place where there's trusted software that can summarize that research and help you think about how you're going to implement that into a lesson, then great. Or if we can get the software to do things that mean that you can then go and read the full research yourself, then brilliant. Like, if we can get to that place, I think it would really help towards the teacher workload and teacher retention crisis.
Absolutely, and like one of the things, yeah, as a prime example of exactly that is I always struggled with kind of like terminology when it was used, particularly in CPD, and then marrying that up with what it looked like in the classroom. So people would stand up and in a CPD session and they'd say, you know, well, let's talk about metacognition. And I
Yeah.
would really struggle to kind of picture in my mind what that was. And I'd need a concrete example to be able to base it on it. And until I got that concrete example, I really struggled to get my head around it. And as soon as I got it, I was fine. And the fact that you can now kind of use something like ChatGPT to say, you know, using these principles, design me an exercise or an activity that is going to do this, 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 and this, I think is phenomenal, because that opens up a whole new world in, like you say, a fraction of the time, but also with the clarification that you need. And let's be honest, sometimes that we all need, but we don't necessarily get the opportunity to ask for, because
No,
you know, as we know, schools are up against it, and sometimes you've got your hour-long CPD, and it is delivered in a little bit of a kind of didactic diatribe of you've got to do all of these things, and we're talking the talk, but we're not walking the walk, because we've only got this time in our timetable to be able to do it. You're going to have to go and do the rest of the working out for yourself. Actually, these tools then give us that opportunity to be able to do that in a much more manageable and approachable way, if you like.
if we can just simplify everything, like for me, just let's not jump on each trend, pick some things that work, that you know work, that the research says work, but that you know work for your context. And then give people time with the experts in their subjects, like department time, to really look at what that means for your subjects. Because the amount of training that I've done over the years that just doesn't work in a computing classroom. It's a completely different environment to teaching English or history or MFL even. You know, we've got computers in front of each of them to start with. The classroom layout, often the kids have got their backs to you naturally in how the room's laid out. So being able to empower middle leaders in schools to apply that research to the subject that they're teaching it, and they're the experts in how that should be taught, and trusting them to do that, like, would be so powerful for lots of the smaller subject areas in school where we've sat through years of CPD that doesn't work or isn't relevant to us, or another marking policy with different colours I've got to work out how to do on Google Classroom. Like, just, you know, simplify these things and use the tech. I've had this like rocky relationship with ed tech. Like, I've always been like, oh, I hate it. Oh, I love it. I hate it. Like, what I hate is the number of trends that come in and claim to revolutionize the classroom. The millions of pounds of equipment that is sat getting dusty in cupboards that isn't been implemented properly. But ed tech, when done well, can be transformational. And they're the things that we need to invest the time and effort and making sure they're implemented right. Otherwise, they just become another dusty headset somewhere.
And that's where the pedagogical intent behind it is so important, and the tool less so. You know, I have lots of fun arguing the toss with people between sort of like Google and Microsoft and all that kind of thing, because I tend to work in a mainly Google environment, but then people go, but you're also a Microsoft innovative educator and all that kind of thing. I go, yeah, because it's about principles, it's not about products. And actually, I really like, and I know some people don't like, but I really like the way Microsoft Sway works, because it's a very simple way of students who aren't that technically minded, or indeed staff come to that, of putting together a very simple but professional looking one-page website, for want of a better word. You know, really, really useful. And there isn't really an alternative to that on the Google platform side of things. So I'm quite happy for students to use other things if that's what they need to use for that purpose. And I think, what we've got to be doing is teaching them to make the choices based on what they want to achieve, not based on what's in front of them. And that's just not the students, that's adults as well, but like you say, the number of cupboards you could open and you just find things in there that have not been used for donkey's years. As a language teacher, one of the things that I never really got my head around is as a language learner, when I was at sixth form, we had language labs. I don't know if you remember them, but there were individual booths and there were tape decks, and the teacher would have made copies through a special machine, and everyone had their own tape, and you could fast forward it and rewind it, and you had your headphones and you could record yourself and everything else. It was brilliant in terms of personalized learning, because you could do everything at your own pace. You could re-record it, you could speed it up, you could, if you wanted to answer a question, you could play it 7 times if you needed to, or 5 or 1, it didn't matter. And then that kind of disappeared, and we moved to like Kuma machines, which were like a little kind of cassette deck that had 6 microphone ports in it, and the idea was you put one on a table and 6 people sit around it. But then you've got 6 people with 1 set of controls. So it was a step backwards, but everybody went and bought them. And yes, they were much cheaper than the language labs, and they were more dual purpose. But actually, the language learning aspect of that took a massive step backwards. Then when they stopped, it went to CDs and DVD, and invariably they got played to everybody at the same speed.
Yeah.
At the same time, and it got even worse. So the fact that the technology has come back around to allow the personalized learning through various different platforms, whether it's YouTube, Puzzle, quizzes, whatever it might be, is brilliant from a language learning perspective. But there was a real period where I was kind of like, you're just selling us stuff for the sake of selling us stuff, and it's not doing the job. No,
and you wonder, don't you, like that these things have got to be focused on the people, especially in the schools, like the school budgets where they are. It's got to be about the pupils' outcomes and the pupils' learning. And it will be interesting what happens with how well adopted things like AI in the classroom are, and when like there's a bit of research into it. I think there's 3 or 4 research studies into like specific pieces of software and reading programs for AI learning, but generally using and embedding AI as another tool in the classroom will be super interesting. So the potential that it's got to personalize learning journeys for pupils is huge, but the massive fear around misconceptions, bias, racism, inaccuracies is a fear for teachers. And I think as a computing teacher, we should be the biggest advocates for new tech, whereas actually I'm not against it, but it's like a proceed with caution for me.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We kind of advocate with caution. This has got huge potential. However, you also need to be critical thinkers when it comes to the results that you're getting. And I think that's, apart from anything else, if anything, that's probably one of the most important skills that students can learn from the use of AI and from computing, everything else, that not just the critical thinking, but the resilience as well of, well, that didn't give me the result I wanted, so I'm going to try a different way. Actually is really important, and often isn't something that's necessarily baked into the kind of the natural processes of perhaps other subjects quite so much, because if you write an essay, to sit and then rewrite it feels like a massive undertaking, whereas to change a line of code and get a completely different output is a totally different aspect, isn't it? And or just from a language perspective as well, just to change the uses of certain words and get a completely different outcome or meaning as a result of it. I think there's real opportunities for those those key, the 4 C's, the communication and the collaboration, absolutely, but also that critical thinking and that creativity side of thing. I think it's fantastic in terms of what could be possible. It's like you say, it's exciting because we could turn around to students and say create something, and they could come up with something that we've never seen, heard, experienced ourselves at all. And then how do we deal with that? That's exciting, but again, at the same time, a worry, particularly if you're stood in front of a classroom of students. But it's a journey, I think, that we've got to be prepared to at least begin and
it's happened. It's happening. It's there's no denying that it's in classrooms already. Pupils are using it. we've got to move with it. The curriculum has to catch up. Like one of my big fears is, where is it actually being, those critical thinking skills and those concerns, bias within AI, where is that actually being taught on the curriculum? Because it isn't really explicitly listed anywhere. It's a little bit in the kind of e-safety stuff, but who's owning that? Is it an expert that is up to date with this research? You know, that real like new world of e-safety that isn't just don't talk to strangers on the internet, like this whole other world of fake news and AI and new software and moving with it and developing with it. It's almost like a whole different area of e-safety that I don't feel like there is resources out there, but that it's not being adopted in schools, and who's taking ownership for that, because it does sit a little in the computing curriculum and there are ways that you can cover it, but that's down to whether or not the school takes an interpretation of the national curriculum that way. So preparing all pupils for the risks and opportunities of tomorrow is something that I really, really hope that schools start to move with and pay attention to as these kind of new trends emerge and grow and develop, because they're some of the biggest risks to the pupils.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it always astounds me. I was a head of sixth form for a number of years, and at that point, one of our most popular courses was critical thinking. As an AS level, it was kind of like the fourth choice. Everyone did, you know, probably critical thinking or something similar as like their fourth A level choice kind of thing, or as an AS in year 12. But the benefits that those students got from studying that course was incredible, and the growth you saw in them as individuals throughout that course, just because they were being pushed to ask those difficult questions, to interrogate the information in front of them, and to think about how reliable is it biased, isn't it, you know, can I trust it, could there be ulterior motives, and all these kind of things. And it always worries me, like you say, that it's not more explicit at a younger age. It's kind of, it's there, but it's hidden under a blanket of something else. And actually, I think we should make more of what that is, because I think if you don't tell people what it is, they don't realize they're doing it quite often. It's like careers education. You talk to a lot of students, you say to them, what careers education they've had? And they'll say, well, we've never had any. But then you say, well, what about work experience? Oh, yeah, no, we did that. What about those mock interviews? Oh, yeah, no, we did that as well. But because if you don't badge it as what it is, sometimes it doesn't necessarily connect. And I do think that's something that we can do a lot more of in terms of, you know, the PSHE. But coming back to your point, sometimes that's being taught by people who are not specialists, who may be confident in one area but not in another. But they've got the same class all year, and they might be brilliant with cybersecurity, but not so good with relationships and sex education, and vice versa. And actually, let's get the right people delivering the right content, rather than what it tends to be is who's available to teach those lessons once we've covered the rest of the curriculum. And that really is, comes down to funding and everything else, obviously, as we well know. But certainly is another area that we massively need to look at.
Yeah, and covering it passionately. Like, let's not just cover it. Let's really, you know, someone that cares about it, someone that you know, when I was in school, I led e-safety in different roles, and I wanted to read about all the latest apps that the kids were using and downloading TikTok very cringily. I haven't, not dancing on there, don't worry, but the, you know, like trying to stay up to date with the trends, you know, all the stuff with Andrew Tate and that whole time, you know, there's stuff that the kids are having access to. I'm a mum to a 2-year-old, and she was sat playing on the Peppa Pig app the other day, and I just thought, I can see where this is going. Like, I can already see her starting to engage in technology and thinking about, how do I start to safeguard her? And, you know, it's almost like a completely different perspective on it now. I've got my own little girl, but yeah, it's we need people that care about it, passionate about it, and knowledgeable about it to write those schemes of work and to stand in front of the pupils and talk about and debate it and have honest conversations.
You know,
loads of people on Twitter are talking about how we need to protect people from technology, and like stop people from using it. And that worries me, because these things are out there. We need to teach our pupils how to use them, because they are going to use them one day. I don't want any young person to have access to things that are completely age inappropriate, but we need to teach them what is appropriate, why it's not appropriate, why they shouldn't be going on those things, how to report things properly, rather than just shying away from that world completely. It's kind of like, you know, crossing the road. Roads exist with busy roads exist with cars, so let's teach kids how to cross those roads safely, rather than never going near a road ever. We've got to teach them to navigate this world.
And you know, we don't just say to them, right, you're 17, here's a car, get driving.
No, exactly.
You know, we know that they're dangerous machines in the wrong hands, so we make sure that people learn how to use them. And then, like you say, for some reason, there are people who don't apply that same logic to something like internet use, and just think that all of a sudden, when they hit adulthood, they're suddenly just going to be okay with it all. And you know, and comes back to what you're saying as well with the, you know, Andrew Tate and things like that. You know, getting those students to understand the way the algorithms work as well, and the fact that if you behave in this way, you're going to see more of this kind of content. And if you start doing this way, you're going to see more of this kind of content. So you're being fed what the algorithms feel you want to be fed. So if you don't like what you're seeing, you've got to do something about that, you know, like you say, and reporting and blocking and all of those kind of things are important. But also, you know, if you see something that's shocking or whatever, look for the counter argument and actually see where that balance is. And I think that's vital moving forward. And we've all got a responsibility, not just teachers, but as parents and society in general. You know, we've got that. It's easy to say, isn't it, that kind of responsibility to be balanced and non-biased, but even in the media, it's so hard. You know,
and I think, you know, it's hard with these things where responsibility doesn't sit explicitly with someone, because then no one does anything with it, or there's little pockets of things but they're not aligned and joined up. And I think that's my worries with the curriculum, that AI and e-safety and internet usage, or whatever you want to label this new world as, doesn't really sit anywhere, and where the computing department don't really own all of it and don't have time to teach all of it. And PSHE, I always get it the wrong way around. But that world, like, would they have the expertise to be able to deliver that properly? Like, I think there's some real, you know, someone's got to take responsibility for that area of the curriculum. And, you know, does digital literacy need to become like literacy and numeracy, that it's everybody's responsibility? Everybody needs to be trained on it, and everybody needs to, you know, we need to see it across all lessons. Like in English lessons would be a great place to start to look at newspaper reports and then how they're portrayed in the media. There's so many cross-curricular links that you can build. So seeing it, I mean, I'd love to see it across the curriculum, but maybe that's my own bias.
No, I think you're absolutely, because at the end of the day, that is the society that we live in. It's the society that they live in, and they're going to be living in it a lot longer than we are. And you know, and it comes back to exactly what you were saying earlier as well. It's not just about being able to deliver that content across the curriculum, but also to be able to deliver it to those different learners across the curriculum. And what's an appropriate way to deliver it to one person may not be, you know, helpful, or it may not be engaging to others as well. So it's not the case, as I'm sure we've all seen, of kind of like, here's a PowerPoint, here's a slide deck, go through this with the class and that's it. Actually, some people need the opportunity to get hands-on. Some people need the opportunity to ask those questions, even if we might feel that they're a little bit strange. And you know, I never forget an RSE lesson that I was privileged to be part of, with a group of Year 9 students at the time. And some of the questions that they asked was, on one hand, quite shocking in terms of their level of knowledge and what they were aware of, and everything else. But at the same time, the same group of young people living in the same town, in pretty much the same environment, at the same age, you had the complete opposite end of the spectrum where others were asking such innocent questions
Yeah.
that you really do kind of, you take a step back and go, wow, I can't believe they didn't know that.
No.
But I can't believe they did know that. And it's that's scary.
And that's, you know, symptomatic of with the same kind of thing applied to technology as the digital divide. Like I've taught lessons where there's a pupil that's never seen a computer before, has only seen like an iPad or a device. I've taught lessons where a pupil's just arrived in the country and has never used a piece of technology before. And in the same lesson, there's a pupil sat 2 or 3 seats down from them that's an excellent programmer and has done loads of extracurricular and things at home. So how do we bridge that gap where, you know, we've got to prepare all pupils, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, for the working world of tomorrow? And at the moment, before AI, well, not now, but before AI, there was like a disadvantage of pupils having parents read work for them or proofread coursework for them or help them with research and push them in the right direction, versus pupils that had nothing and don't get any help at home and are muddling together. And there was that kind of disparity. And now you've got like another layer of it with AI. If you don't have access to the internet at home and you don't have a device, then you're not going to be using and interacting with that software. So you're not going to get the help and support that, you know, some call it cheating, some don't. Copyright, all kinds of things, but people are using it. So it's and learning how to use it, and you know, all the work that's out there, you know, that Dan Fitzpatrick's done around commands and prompts for chat GPT and putting things in there. Pupils are going to be learning how to use this, and some aren't going to have ever seen it or used it before, and that's a whole other digital divide. I have no idea whether that how linked to family income and household income that divide will be, but it will be a divide that we'll start to see come through over the next few years, I'm sure.
And you know, that ties in with, you know, I mean, we were both fortunate to see John Tate speak as well, and speaks exactly to his point around, you know, the amount of intervention and things that schools put in for various different things, but actually what support are we putting in place for the parents to be able to feel empowered when they're dealing with their own children at home, whether it's supporting them with their revision, writing a piece of coursework, or whether it is, you know, completing, you know, homework or whatever it might be. How do we make sure that the parents feel like they can get involved in that conversation? Because there are a huge number of parents who just feel like they can't get involved because they don't know enough about it. And you know, it comes back to that fear of breaking it, I suppose, that we talked about right at the beginning. I don't know what I'm talking about, so I better say nothing. Actually, let's challenge that, and let's give them the key information they need and some tools to enable them to get involved in those conversations and to be able to steer things in the way that they need to be steered to keep the pupils safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally agree.
Rachel, it's been fantastic chatting, and appreciate you taking up your time. It's been really good fun, and given me loads to think about. I'm sure it has to other people as well. So I just want to say thanks ever so much for your time and for everything you're doing for training new teachers as well coming in, because, you know, heaven knows we need them. And like you said, there's a wealth of resources out there for people, particularly those who are, you know, maybe having to pick up the teaching of computing as a second, third subject, whatever it might be. Do reach out and do go and have a look, because you're not on your own, even if you might feel like you are within your own individual school. And there's some fantastic resources out there and some fantastic people willing to help. So I just want to say thanks to you, Rachel, and thanks to everyone for listening or watching, whichever it is you've done. And look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone.